Shalom again, everybody. In my previous video, I shared with you some of the teachings that I published in my book, Protection from Evil, and how I believe that they are absolutely vital and essential for all of us to put into practice today. Pretty much, we are under literally a global psychic attack from forces which, let's be blunt, are from beyond this world. We might think that behind the scenes it's the United States or China or Russia or Iran or Israel or North Korea or run down the list of all the nations that are doing whatever they are doing to fight. But we need to understand underlying them all, there is one single force, one single dark side, we call it. That is, if you will, manipulating all the pieces on the proverbial chessboard towards the ultimate final game. Now, as we look around the world today, we see growing strife, conflict, which, in all due respect, is nothing new under the sun. Here in the Western world, the major concern is the growth of extremist Islam, at least from the Western secular or Christian, possibly even Jewish point of view. That is how Islam, or the Wahhabi Salafiyah, is looked at today. Okay, but you know something? Looks are a matter of perception. And if we look today at the influx of Muslims growing in the Western world, there is all kinds of concerns that they're taking over France and England. And there is now concern of the mayor-elect Mamdani in New York. He's going to transform New York into New Yorkistan or some similar things like that. And there is great concern of the growing presence of Islam. Is this really a concern? I guess that's a matter of perspective, because we need to understand an old, ancient conflict. And that is something that's been referenced in the Talmud long before the existence of the religion of Islam in its present form under the foundations of Muhammad. And that is a great war, a conflict that is referred to in traditional rabbinic, biblical, and even Kabbalistic literature as the end times war of Rome versus Iran. No, that doesn't say Iran, forgive me. It says Persia, Paras, which we know is Iran. And this has been generally symbolically come to be referred to as the wars of Ishmael versus Edom, or what we understand today, Christianity and Islam. Now, again, from the perspective of the West, we look as if Islam is invading the West. Really? Well, let's go back 1,000 years to 1096, and it was Christianity that was invading Islamic land. Today, Islam spreads its message throughout Europe and the United States and other places. And yes, it definitely has its radical jihadist element in it. But why are so many souls being drawn to Islam? That is something people need to take into consideration. Why does the West recognize it as being such a threat? And the answer, long ago prophesied, is that this is the Crusades Part 2. 2,000 years ago, the Jews rose up in violence against the Roman Empire and were destroyed, as we know. 1,000 years ago, the Christians rose up against Islam and fought for centuries until they were finally kicked out of the Middle East. And here we are now, ballpark, close to 1,000 years later. And rather than Islam rise with armies being led with scimitar and rifle, except for those who take those things up, and I don't think a shortage of them, Nonetheless, they are propagating Islam in a different way. Christianity is a very evangelical religion. It's a propagating religion, go out and teaching, preachers, etc. Well, that's what Islam does too. And now there's a spiritual conflict between the missionizing Muslims and the missionizing Christians, each going into each other's territory and domain, and the spiritual war continues. This was long ago prophesied, and this is actually what is referenced in the book of Daniel, where it speaks of the great statue visualized by Nebuchadnezzar with the head of gold, etc., with the feet being made of a combination of iron and clay, and that the combination of the two creates weakness, and therefore the statue, which is a symbol of all world human civilization, collapsing. This is the prophecy of the great war to come. Not so much between this nation or that, but between two spiritual worldviews, Christianity and Islam. And we see this war being prosecuted every day. Today, it's a spiritual war. And in areas in the Middle East and elsewhere, it is a religious war. One should never, ever think that the war in Israel today is about Zionism, which is just some made-up modern nonsense. Israel is the religion of the Jews and Judaism. The connection to the land and Judaism, that's right from the Bible. Even the Quran knows that. But that's not the point. When the Islamic Brotherhood, which became Hamas, rises up, they're not rising up against a 19th century political philosophy. No, they're rising up against Jews and Judaism as a religious force. This is a religious war. That's why they, in their eyes, call it a jihad. That's why they will never surrender. Because for them, this is for Allah. For them, this is what it's all about. Modern Israelis, for the most part, unless they're a soldier who understands and knows, the enemy through fighting, they're, I don't know what, pie in the eye liberals who want to deny the reality and the truths of the harshness of the enemy and forgotten how to prosecute a war, as, for example, the United States prosecuted a war during World War II. Well, something, those who fight with heart to win will fight to the end. And those who don't have such a heart will try to compromise. And it's in that compromise is their weakness and their loss. And we could look throughout history to recognize these military truths. But here we are today, and everyone is asking the question, are we really in the end of days? Is this the end times? Now, that question cannot be answered other than with speculation or theology or beliefs. Your beliefs are as good as mine. But let's go beyond beliefs and look at current events. Because in my book, Visions of the End of Days, I wrote a commentary to Daniel long ago. And I wrote about many of these specific topics, which are very applicable today. And so many people today emotionally are freaking out because they're waiting for the coming of the Antichrist or the Dajjal. In the Jewish tradition, we call him the Armilos. And you have all these different ideas and all these different beliefs, and everybody's pointing a finger at everybody else. Christians, modern Christians, mostly the evangelical type, they're the ones who want to believe that the Antichrist has to be a Jew. I wonder why. Yeah, okay. And if you look back to older Catholic traditions, Orthodox Christianity, they always believed the Antichrist to be Islam. And if you look at modern day Islam, the Dajjal is always considered to be the West, with the United States at its head. Remember, when Iran makes a reference to the Satan, Israel's only the little Satan. America is the big Satan. And America today is under tremendous stress and pressure, possibly on the verge of a civil war. Not so much between conservative and liberal or this or that, but rather fundamentally between those who want to believe in God and serve his will and those who just don't. And here we are, conflict, strife, all prophesied, all understood in ancient times. Now, I am not here, nor did I write my book, to tell you this is the truth or the way, and you have to believe it. We don't believe like that. You're going to believe what you choose to believe. All I want to do is to contribute to you information and education so you can ponder for yourselves from Scripture what is really happening in the world today. So, in my book here, I discuss specifically Daniel's visions. And in order to understand a vision, you need to understand the method and technique of how to interpret visions. Because visions, like dreams, follow a language of interpretation which defy their literal meanings. And that's something we need to understand. I cover all of this in the book. When you have in the Christian Bible Peter's vision of the plate of food coming down from heaven, a blanket of food, so many people want to interpret that literally. And how could you possibly do that in light of all the biblical teachings of dreams that we learn from Joseph and Daniel and the like, that you just don't do that? But people do what they do, however wrongly so. I cover all of this in my book. And of course, in Daniel, there is this famous vision of the weeks and the prophecy of the times, chapter 9. And of course, the Christians understand this. They're convinced that this is somehow, some way, a timeline prophecy for the coming of Yeshu, which I cover very clearly in the book when you look at it line by line, practically and realistically. No such thing could possibly be true. And if you're interested, just read the book and see for yourselves. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but I am asking you to be open to consider looking at things from a perspective that you may not otherwise have seen. The end of times, I think they're upon us. I see the fulfillment of many of the prophecies, and yeah, they're pretty frightening. Yes, they are. Wars and rumors of wars, I think, are everywhere. And if something is going to happen, I don't think it's going to be telegraphed to us long distance that we're going to read about it days and weeks and months in advance and on the internet. I think if something's going to happen, God will drop his hand of judgment like he did on Sodom and Gomorrah in a rather quick and sudden way. So I think it's very important for us to A, know and understand the times that we're living in, and B, understand dreams and visions as they are meant to be, and not as we so quickly misinterpret them to be. And all I can ask is that we recognize and that we remember the times that we're living in, the nature of the reality of the dark and evil force that is seeking to manipulate us all, with the fundamental rule of divide and conquer. Let me remind you of great wisdom that states, united we stand and divided we fall. If you believe in God, doesn't matter what our different theologies about that are. If you believe in morals, righteousness, decency as good human beings, then we stand together as the children of God, regardless of our different religions and faiths and the like, because we know that the real common denominator between us all is that we are all souls created in the divine image, and that we know and understand and recognize that it is the way of God to stand together, united. And with regards to all the differences and the debates we'll have with regards to this doctrine or that dogma, well, we all believe ultimately the Mashiach, God's restorational kingdom of the house of David, will be established. You know, when that day comes and the Mashiach comes, let's wait until then. We'll ask him then what his name is, and he could tell us and we'll listen. But until then, let's stand united so we can greet him together, God be willing. So for those of you who want to understand the times. Want to understand the nature of dreams and visions. Want to understand the prophecies of Daniel. My book, The Vision of the End of Days, is available on Amazon. I encourage you to check it out. It's a quick read. It'll give you a lot to think about. And, well, if you need more information, I have plenty of that right here on our YouTube channel. We have close to 500 videos here, something to keep you busy for a while. And my other books, I've never really discussed many of my books here on YouTube. So I think I'm going to do a whole series going through all my books to give you all the access and information that you need on each one. And you'll do with it as you so choose. Alrighty, guys. Look, we're in rough times. Let's at least acknowledge that and recognize we don't have to be in the dark when we can truly walk in the light, regardless of what and how we call it. God bless us that we accomplish that. Thank you all for listening. God's blessings. Talk to you all soon. Shalom.